They say every trader remembers their first big win. But what they never tell you is this. Your first big win is the beginning of your most dangerous delusion. You think you've figured it out. You feel chosen, touched, as if the market has finally handed you the keys to the kingdom. The charts obey. Your entries hit, the money flows. But what really happened? You didn't learn how to trade. You learned how to get high on illusion. You mistook random reward for real skill. And your ego wrote a story the market never signed off on. And now, you're hooked. You're not studying probability. You're chasing a feeling. The feeling of being right. The feeling of power. The feeling of not being a loser anymore. That's not trading. That's emotional escapism, dressed up in a trading platform. And that is how it begins. This story isn't mine. It's built from the bones of one of the most important trading books ever written, Reminiscences of a Stock Operator by Edwin Lefèvre. But this isn't a summary. It's a mirror. A psychological excavation not of a character, but of you. Across the next 73 minutes, you won't just learn what happened to Livermore. You'll feel what happens to all of us when the market stops being a chart and starts becoming a reflection. The structure is simple. 4 deep sections of pressure and buildup. A 5th, the breaking point. And 3 that bring you back slower, quieter, but sharper than before. This isn't a highlight reel. It's a long sit. It's what happens when you stop chasing wins and start listening to the silence between them. Take a breath. Let's begin. It always begins in silence. Not the silence of discipline. Not the stillness of presence. But the silence right before a storm of ego. Because the market doesn't scream when it sets the trap. It whispers. It flatters. It lures. And your first win, that wasn't a breakthrough. That was bait. You didn't break the market. The market broke into you and found your weakness, the need to feel special. That need has a scent. The market can smell it. Like blood in the water. Like fear on a new recruit. Like a child pretending to be a king. You click that trade with sweaty hands. You watch the bars move like divine choreography. Green. More green. Then your heart beating faster than your logic. You made money fast. And in that moment, you made something else a fantasy. A fantasy where you're not just someone who won a trade. You're someone who wins. Again. And again. And again. But here's the unspoken truth. When you win before you understand why, you don't become a trader. You become an addict with a terminal diagnosis: overconfidence. It's not about that first trade. It's about the first identity you build around it. That's what Livermore discovered painfully. He won early, too. So early he believed he was chosen. He read the tape like a prophet. He cracked the code in the bucket shops. He thought the big leagues would be the same game, just with more zeros. But he didn't realize the market changes when your ego enters the room. And so he walked in with confidence and walked out bankrupt. Then he did it again, and again, and again. Because the wound wasn't financial. It was identity deep. The market wasn't punishing his entries. It was punishing his illusions. And you're no different. You didn't over-leverage because you had an edge. You did it because you had a story. A story that said, I know what I'm doing. I'm finally one of the winners. This is who I am now. But trading isn't about who you are. It's about who you become when your story collapses. When the account bleeds. When the green bars turn red. When the dopamine dries up and you're left with the truth. You never had control. You just had confirmation bias and a keyboard. The tragedy of early success isn't the loss that follows. It's the belief that success means understanding. You think you cracked the matrix, but all you did was align with luck. Randomness wore a friendly face and you tattooed it onto your identity. You made a shrine to your first big win, and then you sacrificed discipline on its altar. Let me ask you something. What did you do after that win? Did you journal? Did you reflect? Did you ask, was that good process or just good luck? Or did you size up, double down, post a screenshot and say, I'm back, as if you were ever truly there to begin with? That first win rewired your brain. It told your nervous system, this is what success feels like. And every trade since then has been a chase, not a plan. You weren't trading, you were looking for a fix. And here's the poison at the core. The more you win while ignorant, the longer you delay your awakening. Because success blinds you, failure exposes you, but illusion seduces you. You don't question the wins, you only question the losses, so the lie grows roots while the truth sits in silence. Livermore made and lost millions, but what destroyed him wasn't the loss, it was the belief that he was meant to win. That belief lives inside you too. It's in the way you size up after a hot streak. It's in the way you feel insulted by losses. It's in the way you think trading is about being right. But trading doesn't care about your identity. It only cares about alignment with process, with risk, with reality. And reality is simple. That first win wasn't the beginning of your career. It was the start of your test. The test of whether you'd get high off the illusion or stay sober enough to ask the harder questions. You want to be a real trader? Then stop celebrating your wins like trophies and start treating them like data points. Stop chasing the feeling of power and start building the discipline of presence. Because the market isn't here to validate you. It's here to expose you. And that first win, that was your mirror. Now tell me, what did it show? You wake up the next day and it's still there. The number, the trade, the feeling. It echoes like a drum in your nervous system. Plateau 800, just like that. You start to believe it wasn't a fluke. That number isn't just a result, it's a doorway into a new version of yourself, into the future you knew was waiting for you. This is it. The moment you stop trying, you're no longer a student. You've arrived. You open your trading platform with a different posture, not to test ideas, but to repeat the feeling, to confirm what you now believe. You're good at this, and that belief is the beginning of your decline. Because the moment you believe you're good, you stop seeing clearly. The hunger to learn dies, replaced by a hunger to be right. And the market, it can feel the shift in you before you even know it's happened. You start sizing up, not because it fits your risk plan, but because winning felt so good yesterday you want more of it today. So you take a trade, fast, no journal, no reflection, no hesitation. You enter with confidence, but not the kind born of experience, the kind born of momentum, of chemical residue, of emotional debt. Because that first win wasn't free. It created a hunger you didn't ask for. And now, you're feeding it. Every new trade isn't just a trade, it's a bid for confirmation, a plea to the market. Tell me I'm still good. Tell me yesterday wasn't luck. Tell me this is who I am now. You're no longer trading a setup. You're trading your identity. And the market doesn't give a damn about your identity. That's when it happens. The second trade. It goes red. And suddenly something inside you stirs. Not fear, not yet, but insult. How dare this trade go red? Didn't you see what I did yesterday? You feel the heat rise in your chest. Your eyes scan faster. Your fingers hover over the exit key. But you don't click. You wait. You rationalize. You pray. You don't cut it. Because cutting it would admit that your previous win wasn't proof, that maybe you don't have it yet. So you hold. And it gets worse. Not just the trade, but your internal state. Tight jaw, tense hands, shallow breath. You're no longer in flow, you're in conflict. Not with the market, but with the version of yourself who needs this trade to work. Because if this trade fails, you don't just lose money, you lose meaning. You lose the story. The one where your first win was a sign, a breakthrough, a signal that you've arrived. But now the signal is static. The screen is flickering, and you realize something terrifying. You weren't trading yesterday. You were tapped. Tapped by randomness, blessed by chance, chosen by nothing at all. And now that randomness has gone quiet, and all you can hear is your own breath. This is when most traders double down, to save face, to buy back their story, to feel powerful again. But if you're awake even for a moment, you'll feel something else. Not anger, not shame. Stillness. A soft, undeniable stillness inside you that whispers, this is the moment, this is the choice. Do you keep chasing the ghost of your first win? Or do you sit still and finally see the game for what it is? Not a story of arrival, not a declaration of talent, but a mirror. One that doesn't reward the confident, but the conscious. You didn't plan for this. You thought it would be a linear journey, learn the system, build the confidence scale, the size. But instead, it became a loop. Not a process, not a strategy, a loop. And it didn't start with your system. It started with your emotion. It always starts with the win. Because the win made you feel something you hadn't felt before: control, certainty, momentum. And now everything you do is an attempt to recreate that emotional state, not the trade itself, but the feeling behind it. That's the loop. And it's not personal, it's neurological. The win fires dopamine. Dopamine attaches to context. Now every chart setup looks like an opportunity to feel good again. You're not analyzing trades, you're scanning for emotional cues. A setup that once looked neutral now glows with potential. Not because it fits your edge, but because it feels familiar. This is how you build your own trap. One repetition at a time, rewarded not by truth, but by timing, by luck. The win creates belief. Belief drives bias. Bias clouds perception. And perception steers the next decision. It's not trading anymore, it's conditioning. The market doesn't have to manipulate you. You've learned to manipulate yourself. You click not because the setup is clean, but because silence is unbearable. You enter not from clarity, but from the need to matter again. This is what most traders call intuition. But real intuition isn't guessing. It's pattern fluency. It's what remains after deliberate practice, after the ego's voice is gone. What you're doing is different. You're romanticizing randomness and dressing it up as insight. And the more it works, the worse it gets. Because now you believe you've cracked the code, but the only thing you've cracked is the emotional high of false mastery. And false mastery is addictive. You start journaling less, you stop reviewing losses, you ignore small slips because you feel in tune. But what you're actually in tune with is your own reward loop. Every trade becomes a fix. You're not managing risk, you're managing anxiety. You tell yourself, I just need one clean session to bounce back. But what you're really saying is, I need to believe I haven't lost it. And so you keep clicking. Not with focus, but with fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being average. Fear of becoming invisible again. Because that first win didn't just give you confidence, it gave you identity. And now, every red trade doesn't just hurt your account, it threatens your sense of self. You don't see a 1R loss. You see a verdict. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I was never meant for this. So you do what every emotionally conditioned trader does: you chase. You overtrade. You revenge trade. You triple down on setups that aren't there because you're not looking for setups, you're looking for redemption. But the market doesn't trade in redemption. It trades in uncertainty, and it has no idea who you are. That's the pain, and also the way out. Because the same way you spiraled in through repetition, reaction, and belief is the same way you spiral out. Slowly, one clear moment at a time, you begin to pause, to observe, to name the loop. And the moment you name it, you no longer are it. You're not a pattern anymore. You're a person seeing the pattern. That's where the shift begins. You realize the win was never about you. It wasn't confirmation of genius. It wasn't the start of your legend. It was just feedback, random, unbiased, unemotional. And when the win loses its emotional weight, so does the loss. You stop measuring your self-worth by the P&L curve. You stop needing every trade to say something about you. You start seeing trades as they are separate, unrelated, independent of identity. That's when you become dangerous, because now you're no longer seduced by results. You're anchored in process. You're not hunting highs, you're executing habits. You don't feel proud when you win, you feel neutral. Because neutrality means you're finally free. Free from the loop. Free from the need to be special. Free to become consistent. The market will still test you, the emotions will still come, but now you'll see them. You won't be inside them, you'll be above them. And that's what changes everything. Not a new strategy, not a new mentor, not a new trading day, but a new awareness. And with it, the beginning of the real edge, self-mastery. But here's what they never show you in trading books. Self-mastery isn't glorious. It's boring, repetitive, uncelebrated. It's waking up and journaling yesterday's trades, even when you nailed them. It's walking away from the screen when your mind starts fantasizing. It's saying no to the third setup, even though the last two worked. It's placing a trade and forgetting about it because you've already decided the outcome doesn't define you. Self-mastery is learning to sit with the itch instead of scratching it, to feel the emotion rise and not ride it. It's deleting your trade log from Twitter, closing the chat room, trading in silence so you can finally hear the voice that matters your own, and not the voice that wants applause, the voice that wants clarity. This isn't the edge most traders look for, but it's the one they need. Because no indicator will save you from the part of you that needs to trade. No mentor can protect you from the identity you've tied to your next win. No system is strong enough to override a mind still addicted to proving it belongs. So if you're looking for your edge, start here. Not in your charts, not in your setups, but in the part of you that can walk away from both. That's the loop breaker. That's the rare signal. The one most traders miss because they're too busy looking for something louder. But you're starting to see it. Not because the market changed, but because you did. You thought it would be a linear journey, learn the system, build the confidence scale, the size. But what you didn't plan for was the fracture that comes after the learning. The part where the market doesn't punish your ignorance, it punishes your certainty. You'd studied the patterns, memorized the entries, refined your risk. You had every reason to believe you were ready. And then you placed the trade. Clean setup, aligned with your plan, everything textbook. And it still went red. You stared at it not just with disbelief, but insult. Because after all this work, this discipline, this control, how could it still betray you? That was the crack. Not in your system, but in your identity. You didn't realize you'd built your confidence on conditions. Conditions like, if I do this right, the result should follow. But the market doesn't care what you think should happen. It only reflects what is. And what is doesn't owe you consistency. So now you're caught in a quiet war between what you've earned and what you expect. You hesitate on the next trade, not because the setup is wrong, but because you no longer trust the connection between process and outcome. That's the paradox no one warns you about. The better you get, the more dangerous your expectations become. Because now every loss doesn't just feel like a loss, it feels like a betrayal of your growth. But growth isn't linear. Sometimes growth looks like hesitation, like stepping back, like sitting out, like watching your perfect thesis fall apart and not letting it take you with it. That's what Livermore learned, not in his wins, but in his losses. Every time he rose from the ashes, he didn't rise because of a better strategy. He rose because he saw the illusion more clearly. He saw how hope disguises itself as logic, how fear dresses up as discipline, how identity hijacks every decision and makes it feel rational. And he still fell for it, again and again. Because this game doesn't get easier, it just gets more subtle. At first, the enemy is ignorance. Then it becomes your attachment to being right. Then it becomes your addiction to improvement. And eventually it becomes your refusal to sit in uncertainty. You want progress so badly, you keep pushing buttons just to prove you still have momentum. But the market sees it. The moment your confidence turns into entitlement, it adapts. It shapeshifts. It hides setups inside setups and traps inside traps. Because it knows what you're addicted to now progress itself. Not presence, not patience, not peace, but motion. And motion without awareness isn't trading, it's twitching. You start entering not because the trade is clean, but because your silence feels unbearable. You can't sit still. Not after a loss, not after a win, not after nothing. You need to do something, anything, to prove you're still progressing. That's the new addiction. And it's dressed like growth. You call it work ethic. You call it commitment. You call it next level. But it's not next level. It's just the same identity loop now wearing performance metrics. And here's the hard truth. You can't outperform your attachment. You can't out-strategize your addiction to progress. You can't journal your way out of a self-image that needs to always be getting better. Because sometimes getting better means doing less. Sometimes the next level isn't about knowing more, it's about needing less. Needing less proof. Needing less validation. Needing less movement to feel secure. You want to grow. Then stop mistaking action for evolution. Stop thinking that placing another trade means you're mastering the game. Sometimes mastery looks like walking away, not because you're scared, but because you're centered. Sometimes the highest form of commitment is the refusal to perform. Sometimes real growth is invisible. It doesn't show up on your equity curve. It shows up in your restraint. In the trade you didn't take. In the trigger you didn't chase. In the silence you allowed to exist without rushing to fill it. You won't get applause for it. You won't get followers from it. But you will get freedom. And that freedom, that's what turns traders into killers. Not cold-blooded, not emotionless, but precise, conscious, patient, deadly, because nothing inside them is grasping anymore. They don't trade to prove, they trade to see. They don't need results, they need presence. That's the edge that doesn't degrade. That's the version of you the market can't manipulate. Not because you've conquered the system, but because you've stopped needing to. And ironically, that's when the game starts to bend. When you no longer chase the outcome begins to seek you. Not as reward, not as justice, but as reflection. Because once you stop trying to force alignment, you start becoming it. And from there, everything changes. It doesn't feel dramatic when it happens. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like nothing. That's what makes it so powerful. Because you're no longer seeking the high. You're seeking the clear. You're not here to win, you're here to witness. Not the market. Yourself. The moment your finger hovers over the mouse and you ask, what's driving this? Not just the setup, the energy underneath it. Is it clarity or is it hunger? That question changes everything. Because most traders don't ask it. They're too fast, too proud, too certain. But you've slowed down enough to notice the difference. You don't enter until the noise settles. You don't chase just because you feel good. You don't exit just because you feel scared. You wait, not for price, for stillness. Because you've learned that if your mind is moving too fast, it's not you trading anymore. It's your ghost. The one who needs to win. The one who needs to belong. The one who needs the market to say, you're enough. That ghost can't trade. It can click. It can size up. It can even win for a while. But it can't sustain. Because ghosts aren't grounded. They drift from identity to identity, trade to trade, day to day, building nothing. And you're done drifting. You're done reacting. You're done proving. You're here to build. Not just a process of self. One that doesn't fracture when the market says no. One that doesn't celebrate when it says yes. One that listens always not to the P&L but to the pause. Because that pause, that's the portal. That's where real traders live. Not in the flash. Not in the thrill. But in the small, silent gap between urge and action. That's the dojo. That's the gym. That's where self-mastery is forged one ignored impulse at a time. And it's not sexy. It's not social. It's not something you can post. You don't get dopamine for walking away from a setup. You don't get applause for closing your screen early. You don't get followers for deleting your trade recap thread. But you do get something else. You get strength. Real, unshakable internal strength. The kind that doesn't need a win to feel worthy. The kind that doesn't flinch when the plan gets tested. The kind that doesn't crumble when the numbers go red. Because you've trained it. Not in a simulator. Not in a Discord server. But in the quiet decisions no one sees. You journaled the green days. You reflected after the wins. You asked, what could I have done better when everything already looked perfect? That's the work. That's the edge. Not what you know, but how deep your self-honesty runs when no one's watching. And eventually it starts to show, not in a flashy breakout, but in your stillness, in your tone, in your rhythm, in the way your entries feel clean, not urgent, in the way your losses land soft, not personal, in the way your identity stays intact even when the week doesn't. That's the arrival point most traders never reach, because they're still chasing the feeling. They think mastery will feel like dominance. It won't. It'll feel like neutrality, not numb-aware, not passive-anchored, not distant-precise. Because when you're really here, really present, really in tune, there's no need to force, no need to convince, no need to chase. You just respond. With calm hands, with quiet mind, with centered breath. Because you finally understand what Livermore meant, not in his words, but in his downfall. The market isn't just a battlefield. It's a mirror. It reflects not your skill, but your state. And the cleaner your state, the cleaner your reflection. That's why mastery feels so empty. Because there's nothing left to prove. Nothing left to chase. Only the moment. Only the process. Only the breath before you click and the awareness that follows. That's trading at its highest form. Not peak performance. Presence. You'll still lose. You'll still make mistakes. You'll still get caught sometimes. That never ends. But now you'll see it sooner. Catch it quicker. Recover faster. Because you're not trying to be flawless, you're trying to be real. And real traders don't need perfection. They need awareness. You're not here to look like a legend. You're here to last. And the traders who last, they're not the flashiest. They're not the smartest. They're not the ones with the biggest following or loudest P&L. They're the ones who can stay consistent in silence, in boredom, in discomfort. They can do the work without needing the reward. They can take the loss without building a story. They can walk away without feeling like they're falling behind. Because they know this isn't a sprint. This isn't a performance. This isn't about being impressive. It's about being aligned. Every day, every trade, every choice. That's the real edge. That's what Livermore glimpsed but couldn't hold. That's what most traders seek but never slow down long enough to find. But you've slowed down. You've listened. You've chosen presence over performance. And that choice, that's what sets you apart. Not your results, not your strategy, not your win rate, but your awareness. That's what makes you dangerous. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you free. You thought the worst thing that could happen was losing money. You were wrong. The worst thing is doing everything right and still losing anyway. Because that's the part that breaks your brain. You followed the plan. You respected the risk. You waited for your edge. You took the trade with calm breath and steady hands. And it still unraveled in front of you. No mistake, no impulse, just reality. That's when the voice creeps in. If that wasn't good enough, maybe I'm not good enough. And that's where trading stops being about markets and starts being about identity again. Because now you're not just processing data, you're processing doubt. You're not just reviewing entries, you're reviewing your worth. You start scanning for flaws that aren't there. You punish process because it didn't give you the result. You change your system after one loss, not because the system was wrong, but because you were afraid to be wrong again. That's how the spiral starts. Not with a mistake, but with a misinterpretation. You think pain means failure. But in trading, pain is just part of the terrain. And if you don't normalize it, it owns you. That's what happened to Livermore. He could sit through drawdowns. He could handle massive risk. But what he couldn't handle was doubt, not in the market, in himself. He changed systems at the top. He added size after wins. He cut edges that didn't feel good. Not because he lost discipline, but because he lost trust. And when you lose trust in your own plan, no amount of talent saves you. Because now you're not executing a system. You're executing emotions. And emotions make terrible trade managers. They size up when they should step back. They revenge trade when they should walk away. They press buttons because the silence is unbearable. They crave reassurance from a chart that doesn't owe them anything. That's the part no one talks about. You can be right and still lose, and that's not failure. That's just probability doing its job. But your nervous system doesn't care about probability. It cares about pain. It cares about pattern. It cares about safety. So what happens when safety gets rewired into, I must win to feel okay? You no longer trade. You negotiate. With the market, with your strategy, with yourself. You bend rules just a little. You ignore the checklist just once. You justify the re-entry because price came back. And before you know it, you're off book. Not because you're undisciplined, but because you're scared. Scared of loss. Scared of regret. Scared of being in pain without a reason. That's the hardest part of this game. You will suffer losses that are clean. You will do everything right and still bleed. You will follow your plan into the red, and if you're not ready for that, you'll throw the plan away. Not because it's broken, but because it didn't protect you from pain. But here's the truth. No system can protect you from pain. Only your perspective can, and that's where the real work begins. Not in backtesting, not in strategy optimization, but in the emotional reconditioning of what loss means. Because until you rewrite that, you'll always sabotage what works. You'll abandon edges the moment they stop paying. You'll reject strategies that don't stroke your ego. You'll skip trades because the last one hurt, even if this one is textbook. And every time you do that, the market doesn't punish you. You punish yourself. With confusion, with inconsistency, with 1,000 versions of what's wrong with me. But nothing is wrong with you. You're just afraid, and you haven't built a system for what to do when the pain is clean. When the loss isn't your fault, when the trade was good and it didn't work. That's what separates traders who last from traders who loop. Not who can win the most, not who has the cleanest setup, but who can suffer well, Who can lose with their plans still intact? Who can sit in pain without rewriting the process to avoid it? That's a different kind of mastery. One that isn't about predicting the market, but about enduring it. Not with gritted teeth, with clear breath, with honest journaling, with the strength to say that was a good loss. That's what makes you dangerous. Not your edge, not your alpha, not your execution, but your relationship to pain. Because the trader who can feel pain and not flinch, that's the trader who can hold the line. And in this game, the one who holds the line longest wins. You think holding the line means resisting the trade you want to take. But sometimes holding the line means taking the trade you don't want to take because it's the right one. It means trusting your edge when your nervous system is screaming, "Don't do it, you just lost." It means clicking when your hands are still shaking from the last red candle. It means logging into your trading platform not to recover, but to stay aligned. Because this game isn't about how you trade when you're confident. It's about how you trade when your confidence is gone. That's when the real edge reveals itself. Not in setup selection, in self-regulation. Most traders wait to feel good to execute. But feelings are lagging indicators. By the time you feel safe, the trade is gone. So if you're chasing emotional comfort, you're already late. That's why traders sabotage after a loss. They're not broken. They're just trying to feel better. And the fastest way to feel better, get green again. Even if the setup's not there. Even if the risk doesn't fit. Even if the trade is trash. They're not chasing profit. They're chasing permission. Permission to stop feeling inadequate. Permission to believe again. But that trade doesn't give you belief. It takes it from you. Because now you've taught your brain, I only follow the plan when I feel good. And that's not trading. That's bargaining. But the market doesn't negotiate. It only reflects. So what does it reflect back when you follow the plan through discomfort? It reflects strength. And over time, that strength becomes confidence, not the kind that waits for results, but the kind that creates them. Because now you're not executing for emotional relief. You're executing for internal alignment. That's how belief is built. Not by winning, by showing up for your process, even when it hurts. By taking clean losses without self-punishment. By sticking to the checklist when your mind screams for deviation. That's the real edge no one can take from you. Because it's not technical. It's embodied. It's not on your charts. It's in your nervous system. You've trained it. In the red days. In the drawdowns. In the weeks where everything you touched went sideways. But you stayed. You journaled. You reflected. You showed up the next day without revenge in your blood. You took the right trade, not the easy one. And that's when things started to shift. Not because the market changed, but because you did. You stopped waiting for permission. You stopped waiting for momentum. You stopped needing certainty to stay engaged. And that's when you became consistent. Not because your edge got better, but because you stopped abandoning it. That's what no one tells you. Consistency doesn't come from refining your edge. It comes from removing the parts of you that refuse to respect it. The fear, the entitlement, the pressure to make it back, the narrative that says, if I lose again, I'm not cut out for this. None of those voices care about process. They only care about protection. But you're not here to be protected. You're here to be present, and presence doesn't need comfort. It needs commitment. Not to outcomes, to structure, to risk, to rules, to the quiet decision to keep showing up like a professional even when nothing feels professional. That's what makes trading hard. You will be punished for doing the right thing. You will lose money for following your edge. You will look like a fool on paper and still be acting in integrity. And the question is, can you hold that tension without folding? Can you be the trader whose equity curve dips but whose discipline doesn't? Can you lose 5 trades in a row and not change a damn thing? Not because you're stubborn, because you're trained. That's what makes a real trader. Not someone who avoids red, someone who can bleed with structure, someone who can take hits and stay rooted, someone who doesn't need the market to be fair, just needs to stay aligned. And if you can do that, if you can hold the line when it matters, you don't just survive, you compound. Not just your capital, your identity. Because now your self-image isn't based on how you feel. It's based on how you act, especially when it's hard. And when your identity is built on action, not emotion, you become unstoppable. Because you're no longer seeking permission. You're no longer running from pain. You're no longer outsourcing your worth to the next candle. You've chosen the harder path, the lonelier one, The one where no one applauds you for taking a clean loss. The one where no one celebrates your flat week because you avoided overtrading. The one where no one sees how many times you almost clicked and didn't. But that's the path that lasts. That's the one that scales. That's the one that makes you a trader, not just someone who trades. You're not just building a system. You're building a nervous system that can hold uncertainty without collapsing. Because anyone can follow rules when it's easy. Anyone can trade clean when the market is kind. But who are you when the market is indifferent? When it doesn't care that it's Monday? When it doesn't care that you journaled? When it doesn't care that you sized down and stuck to plan? That's when most traders fracture. Because they confuse effort with entitlement. They think doing it right should guarantee them results. But there are no guarantees here. Only probabilities. And sometimes those probabilities will turn against you for weeks. Not because you're broken. Not because your edge is dead. But because randomness doesn't owe you consistency. And if your mindset depends on consistent feedback, you're vulnerable. Because the market doesn't pay you on schedule. It doesn't reward you for being good. It rewards you for being aligned. And alignment means holding steady when the data doesn't validate you. When you're green on discipline but red on equity. When you're proud of your entries but punished by outcomes. That's when real traders are born. Not during the streaks. During the storms. When you take the cleanest trade of the week and it stops you out in 30 seconds. When you hold your position exactly as planned and the breakout never comes. When your entire week is a checklist full of A-plus trades and your account still bleeds. That's when the amateurs rewrite their system. That's when the pros double down on their process. Because they know edge plays out over time. Not over one day. Not over 5 trades. Not even over a month. And that's what most traders can't stomach the time horizon of real consistency. Because it's not emotional. It's statistical. And statistics are boring. They don't feel like breakthroughs. They feel like monotony. Like showing up. Like staying calm. Like watching your equity curve move sideways while your mind whispers, you're wasting time. That's when traders start forcing. Start adjusting. Start making emotional trades dressed up as strategic evolution. They tell themselves, I'm adapting. But they're not adapting, they're escaping. Escaping boredom. Escaping the silence. Escaping the responsibility of staying present when there's nothing to do. But the best traders, they get bored and stay still. They get frustrated and keep the size. They get tested and don't take the bait. Because they know boredom is where the real damage happens, not from the market, but from themselves. It's not the chop that destroys most traders. It's the response to the chop. The forced action. The revenge fill. The over-optimizing. The search for novelty. But trading isn't about novelty. It's about novelty resistance. Can you stay centered while nothing is happening? Can you do nothing and still feel complete? Can you sit in the pocket and not invent a signal just to feel engaged? That's emotional discipline. That's nervous system strength. That's how real careers are built, not through adrenaline, but through awareness. Not through hyperactivity, but non-reactivity. That's what separates you from the noise. Not your indicators. Not your monitor setup. Not your niche strategy. But your ability to sit still in uncertainty and not try to fix it. Because the moment you try to fix a market that isn't broken, you break your edge. You chase. You size up. You double-click just to see something move. And all that motion, it's not strategy, it's a scream. A scream from the part of you that doesn't know how to be still. But now you do, because you've practiced it. You've felt the temptation and stayed seated. You've watched the FOMO rise and said, not now. You've watched other traders celebrate green days and didn't let it dictate your own process. You've watched days pass with no trades and still felt like a trader. That's presence. That's the game behind the game. And most never see it. Because they're too busy chasing noise and calling it signal. But you're starting to hear something else. Something underneath the noise. Something steady. It doesn't yell. It doesn't rush. It just whispers, wait. Not forever. Not fearfully. But patiently. Because you know your edge isn't just about entries. It's about timing. It's about context. It's about when not to trade just as much as when to click. And that discernment, that's the edge behind the edge. The one they never show on YouTube. The one that doesn't fit in a Discord highlight reel. The one you build alone, in silence. One pause at a time. You didn't come here to click buttons. You came here to train. To evolve. to rewire the way you respond to discomfort, not just in markets, but in yourself. Because how you trade is how you live. And most traders, they live in reaction. They enter trades the way they enter arguments: too fast, too proud, too personal. They exit trades the way they leave relationships: too early, too emotional, too messy. They evaluate trades the way they evaluate themselves: through shame, through ego, through distorted memory. But not you. Not anymore. Because you've started to see the map underneath the movement. You've seen how every impulsive click was a way to avoid an emotion. How every rule break was a cry for certainty. How every oversized trade was a plea to feel powerful again. And when you see that, you stop blaming the market. You stop blaming the system. You stop blaming yourself. You just observe, not with judgment, with curiosity. And that curiosity, that's the beginning of power. Because now you're not a prisoner of your patterns, you're a witness to them. And when you can see the pattern, you can pause it. You can reframe it. You can replace it, not all at once, but one choice at a time. One clean exit, one skipped setup, one smaller size on a lower conviction trade. That's how rewiring happens, not with breakthroughs, but with micro decisions. And those micro decisions, they compound. They build trust, not just in the market, in yourself. And when you trust yourself, you don't need perfection. You don't need certainty. You don't need the next green trade to feel valid. Because your validation isn't emotional anymore. It's structural. It's in your checklist. It's in your logs. It's in the way you showed up today, even when nothing happened. That's how Livermore lost himself. He stopped trusting what got him there. He traded performance, not presence. And performance doesn't last, because it's built on outcomes. But presence survives anything. The drawdowns, the slumps, the hot streaks that threaten to inflate you, the red weeks that tempt you to self-destruct. Presence doesn't care. It just tracks. Are you aligned? And if the answer is yes, it continues. That's who you're becoming. A trader who trades as an expression of alignment, not approval. A trader who takes a loss without a scar. A trader who can sit through the sideways market with the same breath they bring into their winning streaks. That's not talent. That's not luck. That's training. That's mastery. That's why it feels quiet. Because there's nothing left to chase. Just one moment at a time. Just one click or no click at a time. Not because you're hesitant. Because you're tuned in to the market, to your process, to your breath. You've stopped trying to prove something. And because of that, you're becoming something. Not a trader who wins every time. A trader who can last every time. That's the difference. And that difference, it doesn't show on your chart, but it shows in everything else. In how you recover, in how you wait, in how you speak to yourself when it doesn't work, in how you keep showing up when no one is watching. That's what makes you real. That's what makes you consistent. That's what makes you free. It doesn't happen during chaos. It doesn't happen after a loss. It doesn't even happen in fear. It happens in silence. That's where most traders break. Not when the market moves violently, but when it doesn't move at all. The boredom creeps in. The silence stretches. The space between setups gets too wide, and your mind starts whispering, maybe I should tweak something. Maybe this setup isn't working anymore. Maybe I'm falling behind. You open Twitter. You scroll the Discord. You see traders posting +5R days while your own journal is blank. And it starts to feel like stillness is failure. Like waiting is laziness. Like patience is just another word for missing out. But that's the trap. Because trading isn't just about knowing what to do. It's about knowing when not to do anything and still feeling whole. Most traders can't handle that. They're trained to perform, trained to produce, trained to do something because action feels like progress. But in trading, undisciplined action is just movement without meaning. It's thrashing. It's button clicking for dopamine. It's I need to feel engaged, disguised as I think I see something. That's when you start forcing trades. B trades become A trades. A becomes it almost looks good. And then you're in a position, not because it fits your plan, but because you couldn't sit still. You just wanted the feeling back. The illusion of momentum. The fantasy of control. But deep down, you know it wasn't there. The setup was weak. The context wasn't clean. Your nervous system was unsettled. And now you're in a trade that didn't need to exist all because you couldn't tolerate the silence between real edges. That's how traders lose careers, not from one big blow-up, from a slow erosion of structure, one board, click at a time. One rule bent, one filter ignored, one journal skipped, and over time the process doesn't die all at once, it dissolves. It gets diluted by subtle exceptions. It gets drowned by emotional negotiation. And suddenly you're not trading your system anymore. You're trading your emotions, wearing your system like a costume. But here's what real traders know. The boredom is the work. The silence is where the edge lives. Not because nothing is happening, but because that's where your emotional thresholds are exposed. It's easy to feel professional when the market is active. But can you feel like a trader when nothing's on? Can you sit through 5 hours of chop and still log the session? Can you end a flat day and still mark it as a win because you followed your plan? That's where the difference is made. Not in the green days, in the no-trade days, in the sessions where you wanted to act but didn't. Because that restraint, that's your real edge. Not the entry, not the stop placement, but the choice not to pollute your data with garbage trades just to feel alive. The best traders, they don't avoid boredom. They train for it. They build routines inside the silence. They use the space to refine, not react. They review. They stretch. They breathe. They journal thoughts that never become actions. Because they know the edge isn't just mechanical, it's emotional. And if you can't sit in stillness without inventing a reason to click, you don't have an edge. You have a habit. You have a dependency. You have a performance addiction. But that can change. The moment you stop trying to fill the space and start listening to what it's revealing. Because boredom isn't a signal to act. It's a signal to observe. It's a doorway. And on the other side, awareness. The kind that catches patterns early. The kind that feels when urgency is creeping in. The kind that whispers, there's nothing to do right now, and that's okay. That's the new muscle. Not the one that acts. The one that waits with full presence. Not anxious waiting, not passive waiting. Attentive stillness. The market will tempt you during those moments. It will throw noise at you, random spikes, shaky volume, indicators that almost trigger. But that's where you train. Not to block out the noise, to filter it. To ask, is this real or is this just motion? To look at the screen and ask yourself, do I see my setup or just my craving? That's the voice you need to hear, not the market's. Your own. Because the silence isn't just between trades. It's where the trader is built. You can feel it in your body. The restlessness, the tapping foot, the shifting chair, the way your eyes scan the charts, not for confirmation, but for stimulation. You're not looking for a trade. You're looking for a reason to trade. That's the difference. That's the danger. Because that urge to act, it doesn't come from edge, it comes from agitation. And most traders can't tell the difference. They confuse internal noise with market signal. They interpret emotional discomfort as evidence something needs to change. They misread boredom as a threat to progress. But boredom isn't dangerous. Reacting to boredom is, because it tricks you into trading defensively, not defending your capital, defending your identity, your status, your momentum. You place a trade just to say, I'm still in the game. But real traders don't need to prove that. Because their game isn't built on output. It's built on structure. Their progress isn't measured in trades, it's measured in discipline. And when there's no trade to take, they still win by walking away clean. That's the part most traders never master, because it doesn't feel like mastery. It feels like nothing. No dopamine, no progress bar, no highlight reel. Just stillness. And that stillness, it's a test. It asks, can you be okay with doing nothing? Can you be at peace with letting the market move without you? Can you feel whole on a day where your P&L doesn't change? Because if not, you'll always be vulnerable. Vulnerable to noise. Vulnerable to overtrading. Vulnerable to distraction dressed up as opportunity. That's how good traders become inconsistent. Not because they don't have a system, but because they don't have a process for silence. They have a system for entries, a system for stops, a system for management, but no system for waiting. No system for what to do when there's nothing to do. That's the gap. That's the part that breaks most people, not the trade. The space between trades. Because space is uncomfortable. It mirrors your doubt, your fear of falling behind, your desire to be active, not present. And so you click, not from clarity, from compulsion. You justify it after the fact. You say there was a setup. But deep down, you know it wasn't clean. You felt it. That small twitch in your gut, that tiny hesitation before you clicked, that flicker of, is this really in the plan? And you ignored it, because feeling something was better than feeling nothing. That's where traders bleed slowly, not in the big losses and the soft betrayals. The subtle drift from process, the half-trades, the near misses, the ones you don't even journal because you're not proud of them. That's the inventory you need to keep, not of your winners, of your deviations, of the trades that never should have existed. Because those aren't technical errors, they're emotional tells, signals from your nervous system that your state isn't stable, that your edge isn't being executed, it's being hijacked. And if you want to stop it, you have to build a plan for the pauses, a routine for the nothingness, a checklist for boredom. Because if you don't, the market will build one for you. And it will look like a bunch of trades you didn't really believe in, a week of drawdown you didn't see coming, a chart full of noise you created yourself. That's what boredom costs you. Not emotionally, mathematically. It pollutes your edge. It corrupts your expectancy. It burns your time. It clouds your data. And worst of all, it makes you question your system when the only thing broken was your ability to wait. That's why pros treat waiting like work. They ritualize it. They protect it. They track it. They don't just log trades, they log restraint. They look at a zero trade day and say, I followed my system. Because they know no trade is still a trade. It's a vote for consistency. It's a message to your subconscious, I'm in control. Not the market, not the chart, not the urge. Me. And when you stack enough of those votes, that becomes who you are. Not someone who gets lucky. Not someone who catches big moves. Someone who operates with intention. That's the trader who survives boredom. That's the trader who thrives through chop. That's the trader who doesn't chase, doesn't tweak, doesn't flinch, because they've already decided who they are before the market opens. And every day they sit down, they prove it again, not with trades, with choices, with pauses, with breathing through the itch instead of scratching it. That's where the real edge lives, not on the screen, in you. There's a moment you won't recognize at first. It's not loud. It doesn't come with fanfare. No voice in your head says you did it. It just happens. You realize you haven't forced a trade in weeks. You look at your journal and it's clean not just of red, but of regret. You're not avoiding mistakes. You're just not making the same ones anymore. You're not reacting. You're responding. And it's not heroic. It's quiet. The kind of quiet that used to make you restless now, it feels like home. Because now you understand what most traders never do. Stillness is strength. Not because it's passive, but because it's a choice. A deliberate one. To wait. To breathe. To let the market pass without chasing it. And it doesn't feel like nothing anymore. It feels like control. Like professionalism. Like power not from pressing buttons, but from not needing to. And that's when everything changes. Not your results, your identity. You're no longer someone who trades. You're a trader. Not because of how many setups you find, but because of how many you skip. Not because of how often you act, but because of how often you pause. You've stopped measuring yourself by output. You've started measuring by alignment. Did I follow the plan? Did I act on my edge? Did I stay out of the way? Those are the new metrics. And the scoreboard, it's internal. Because no one sees the trades you don't take. No one praises the patience. No one claps for stillness. But you feel it. In your breath, in your confidence, in the way your journal sounds more like clarity and less like chaos, in the way you end a no-trade day and still feel like you accomplished something because you did. You protected your edge. You kept your data clean. You trained your mind to stay quiet. And that training, that's what scales. Not setups, not indicators, not the latest strategy from the forum. Just you sitting still when everything in you wanted to move. Just you logging the day with no trades and still feeling like a trader. Just you building the kind of psychological posture that doesn't break under pressure. That's the real edge. The one no one sees. The one no one can take from you. Because it's not in your system. It's in your spine. It's in your pulse. It's in your breathing when the screen goes flat. It's in your stillness when the noise gets loud. It's in your eyes not scanning for trades, but watching your own state. You've stopped chasing setups. You've started managing yourself. And that's the difference between doing this for a season and doing this for a life. Because the market doesn't care if you're interested. It only rewards those who are committed, not to activity, to alignment, to process, to presence. And you're no longer afraid of silence because you've learned what lives inside it. Discipline, awareness, edge. Your real edge. The one built through thousands of invisible choices. The one that doesn't show on the chart but shows up in every trade you don't take. That's the trader you've been becoming all along. And now, you're just beginning to see it. You didn't notice it at first. How could you? Growth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up as a green candle. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or sudden confidence. It arrives as something quieter. You log a red trade and don't feel shame. You miss a move and don't chase the next one. You take a day off and don't feel like you're falling behind. That's how growth begins. Not as power, as peace. It's not a breakthrough. It's a softening. The voice in your head starts whispering instead of yelling. The pressure to become someone gets replaced by the intention to stay aligned. You stop searching for edges that solve your emotions and start managing the emotions that sabotage your edges. You stop needing the next trade to feel valid because you already are. And you didn't get there by reading a book. You got there by bleeding through the same mistakes until the cost wasn't worth repeating them. That's how it happens. One impulse not acted on. One journal entry written even when you didn't want to. One session reviewed even when it hurt. It's not glamorous. It's not marketable. It's not something you can package and sell. But it's the most valuable thing you'll ever build. Because it's not about your system anymore. It's about your relationship to yourself inside that system. That's the invisible curve. The one that moves when you let the trade go and still feel like a trader. When you size down on purpose, not out of fear, but from presence. When you say no to setups that are almost valid because almost isn't good enough anymore. That's not rigidity. That's clarity. Because now you're not chasing opportunity, you're filtering it. You're not desperate to find a trade. You're ready to receive one when it's clean. And if it doesn't come, you're okay with that. Not because you've given up, because you've grown up. You've realized your job isn't to control the market. It's to not let the market control you. That shift changes everything. It rewires your focus. You stop obsessing over which strategy is best. You start obsessing over whether you followed yours. You stop judging the outcome. You start measuring the behavior. You start asking better questions. Not how much did I make, but how clean was the decision. Not did I win, but did I act in alignment? That's the shift from trader to professional. And it has nothing to do with results. Because results come and go. But standards, those compound. That's the real growth curve. Not the equity line, the identity line. The one that goes up every time you do the right thing when no one's watching. The one that sharpens every time you journal the urge instead of acting on it. The one that strengthens every time you end the session and say, I didn't trade, and that was the right decision. You don't realize it at first. You just feel stable. Less noise in your head. Fewer emotional spikes. More neutrality, not as a performance, but as a posture. You don't have to force calm anymore. You are calm. You don't have to suppress fear. It just doesn't run the show. You're no longer surviving your emotions. You're partnering with them. You feel the FOMO and smile at it. You see the loss and don't flinch. You see the chop and don't invent setups just to break the silence. That's the quiet power most traders never find. Because they're chasing acceleration, not alignment. They want growth that shows, but the real growth, it hides. In the empty spaces between triggers. In the 10 seconds you waited before clicking. In the moment you closed your laptop not to escape, but because you were done for the day. No frustration. No chasing. Just completion. That's the new edge. Not finding more trades. Finding more peace. So you can see clearly. So you can act intentionally. So you can walk away without the market taking a piece of you with it. That's the curve you want to grow. The one that doesn't spike on lucky trades, but rises every time you choose yourself over your urges. Most traders want progress to feel like power. But real progress feels like less noise, less grasping, less effort to appear confident because you actually are. Not arrogant, not loud, just settled. You don't need to be the best anymore. You just need to stay in the game long enough for your discipline to do the heavy lifting. That's the paradox. The more you grow, the less impressive it looks. You stop overanalyzing charts. You stop refreshing your P&L. You stop entering trades just to feel productive. You just wait, watch, execute when it's time. That's what makes you consistent. Not doing more, doing less of what doesn't matter. Less second-guessing. Less tweaking after every loss. Less chasing a perfect system because your edge isn't about perfection. It's about execution. And execution is about emotional posture, not technical theory. Because every trader has a system, but very few have a self that can handle it. That's what you've been building. Not just setups, but a state. A version of you that doesn't crack when randomness strikes. A version of you that doesn't cling to wins or spiral on losses. A version of you that doesn't need every trade to say something about who you are. You've de-weaponized your results. You've decoupled your worth from your chart. And because of that, you're dangerous now. Not because you always win, but because loss doesn't distort you anymore. You don't shrink after red days. You don't inflate after green ones. You don't abandon your plan when the feedback stings. You don't need the market to validate you. And when you don't need validation, you don't chase. You don't force. You don't violate your own rules just to feel in control. Because you are in control, not of the outcome of your actions. That's the power you've been earning all along. The power to stay steady, to stay simple, to keep showing up not as someone trying to conquer the market, but as someone trying to honor their process. That's the new game. Not, how can I trade better? But, how can I respect my system even when I don't feel good? That's where transformation happens. In the tension between what you feel and what you do. And every time you choose alignment over impulse, you widen the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. Because growth isn't about finding new tools. It's about becoming someone who needs fewer alerts, fewer indicators, fewer inputs from strangers, fewer dopamine spikes to stay motivated. You've stopped needing more to feel ready. You're just ready because you know what your job is. To show up, to follow process, to review honestly, to act cleanly, and then step away without dragging the market home with you. That's the mark of a professional. Not someone who's emotionless, someone who can feel emotion without being led by it. You still feel frustration, still feel temptation, still feel fear, but you don't turn those feelings into trades. You turn them into awareness. You write them down. You name them. You train with them. That's what makes them manageable, not suppressing them, integrating them. You've built an emotional edge, and that edge is invisible. No one can see it on your charts, but it's there in the restraint. In the pauses, in the fact that you don't panic when things go sideways. You regulate, you reset, you return the next day without needing a hot streak to believe in yourself. Because belief isn't emotional anymore. It's structural. You've built it through evidence, not from wins from actions, from the days you didn't skip the journal, from the weeks you stuck to size even during a slump, from the trades you passed on because clean meant more than active. That's how self-trust is compounded. In quiet moments, in micro decisions, in 100 tiny choices no one claps for, but you feel it, in your breath, in your posture, in the way your hands don't shake when it's time to click, in the way your nervous system doesn't light up with desperation, but stays still with readiness. That's your new normal. And it didn't happen all at once. It was built, not through revelation, through repetition, not through breakthrough, through boring, faithful execution. That's why it feels so different now. Not exciting, not dramatic, just steady. You look back and barely recognize the older version of you. The one who chased every green candle. The one who built a narrative around every trade. The one who thought growth was something loud. But now, growth feels like clean charts, like shorter journal entries, not because you're lazy, but because there's less emotional residue. Like ending a session with no trade and feeling proud because you followed your plan, and that was enough. It feels like closing your laptop while you're still calm. It feels like going outside and not needing to check your phone every 5 minutes. It feels like a full breath, the kind that isn't waiting for a result to feel earned. That's how you know something real has shifted. Not because your equity curve exploded, but because your inner curve is rising. The curve that no one sees, the one that compounds quietly, through stillness, through restraint, through hundreds of choices that don't show up on your P&L, but define who you are as a trader. And the more you align with that, the less you feel like you're fighting the market. Because you're not. You're not even managing risk anymore. You're managing yourself. You've stopped trying to control volatility. You've started designing for it. You've stopped trying to trade every move. You've started letting the market come to you. And when it doesn't, you're fine. Because you're not attached to trading anymore. You're committed to it. That's different. Attachment is frantic. It's hungry. It needs to trade. But commitment is calm. It's clean. It doesn't chase. It doesn't perform. It just shows up every day ready. And you've become that version of you. Not by learning more, by needing less. Less from the market. Less from the outcome. Less from the external scoreboard. Because the real scoreboard is inside now. And it's tracking different metrics. Did I act from clarity? Did I follow my plan? Did I regulate when it got hard? Did I stop when it was time? That's the new language. That's the new game. And the edge, the real edge, it's not something you find. It's something you become. You're not chasing anymore. You're not proving anything. You're just showing up. And that alone makes you dangerous. Because now your presence is consistent. Not because you've eliminated emotion, but because you've outgrown reactivity. You don't flinch at volatility. You don't get high on green. You don't spiral on red. You breathe. You journal. You execute. You rest. You've stopped measuring your worth by whether the market rewarded you today. You've started measuring it by how well you stayed aligned. That's consistency, not perfect outcomes. Repeatable behavior. And it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels neutral. Which is why most traders never get here. They can't sit through the part of growth that feels uneventful. They want fireworks. You want structure. They want excitement. You want rhythm. And because of that, you're still here. You didn't blow up. You didn't disappear after the first drawdown. You didn't quit because it got hard. You evolved slowly, not by upgrading your strategy every week, by upgrading your capacity to sit still. That's what people miss when they talk about consistency. It's not about never losing. It's about never losing yourself in a loss. It's about not needing a green day to believe in your system. It's about not giving back discipline just to chase momentum. It's about holding the posture even when the market has nothing to give you today. That's the version of you who lasts, not the one with the best month, the one who shows up clean for years. No self-punishment, no hero trades, no over-leveraged Hail Marys. Just a boring, beautiful cadence of doing what needs to be done and logging off. That's freedom. Not the kind that shows up as money, the kind that shows up as peace. You could walk away right now and feel proud because you didn't abandon yourself. You didn't sell your process for a dopamine spike. You didn't betray your edge for a screenshot. You stayed grounded even when nothing exciting happened. That's what consistency buys you. Not clout, not perfection, clarity. Because you're not wondering who you'll be tomorrow. You've already decided. You're not worried about how you'll respond to loss. You already trained for that. You're not scared of boredom. You've built a home inside it. So when the market goes quiet, you stay still. When the market gets violent, you stay aligned. When the market gives you nothing, you give it nothing back. You don't force. You don't react. You wait. Not passively. Professionally. Because that's what this has become now, a profession. Not an obsession. Not a roller coaster. Not an identity fantasy. Just a craft. One you respect. One you protect. One you practice not because you need to prove something, but because it's become part of how you breathe. That's the trader you've become. Not a performer. A practitioner. And it doesn't show up on Instagram. It doesn't look sexy in metrics, but it shows up in the logs, in the subtle improvements, in the way your worst days look like other people's best days because your floor is higher now. Not emotionally, operationally. Because even when you're off, you're never out of bounds. You're never panicking. You're never swinging wildly at setups just to feel something. You're working quietly, steadily, safely, professionally. And the longer you stay here, the more natural it becomes. You no longer have to resist the urge to overtrade. Because the urge doesn't come. You don't have to restrain your need to chase. Because you don't feel that need anymore. You're not resisting your impulses. You're replacing them with routines, with rituals, with intentional repetition. That's the long game. That's what this always was. And now that you've slowed down, you can finally see it. You used to chase the market for meaning. Now you sit with yourself and find it there. Because trading never gave you identity. It only revealed it. It revealed how you respond to pressure, how you handle doubt, how you act when no one is watching and no trade is working. That's the real journal, not the one in your notebook. The one written in how you show up when it's boring, brutal, or beautiful. And now you're fluent in your own behavior. You don't just trade setups, you trade awareness. You don't just track stats, you track self-respect. That's what most traders never realize. This isn't a game of edge. It's a mirror. Every click reflects a decision. Every session reveals a posture. Every trade is an X-ray not of your strategy but of your state. And your state, it's no longer erratic. It's no longer driven by the need to win. It's no longer enslaved by emotion, fear, or fantasy. It's stable, grounded, clear, not always perfect but always observable. And because you can observe it, you can work with it, shape it, grow it. That's your real leverage now. Not margin, maturity. Because nothing rattles you like it used to. Not because you're numb, because you're trained. You've seen the loops, you've named the patterns. You've felt the emotions and learned how to sit with them. That's the highest level, not the one that beats the market. The one that no longer needs the market to feel complete. You don't need a green day to validate your process. You don't need a winning streak to feel like you belong. You belong because you show up every day aligned. That's the quiet freedom you never saw coming. The kind that doesn't flash. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that feels like breath. Like stillness. Like closing your journal and smiling, not because the day was perfect, but because you were honest. That's the new P&L. Presence and linearity. Am I here? Am I in sync? Am I acting clean? That's all you need now. Because once the noise fades, once the identity drama falls away, all that's left is your behavior. And your behavior. It's not perfect, but it's real. And because it's real, it's enough. So you log the session. You close the screen. You exhale. And you walk away not as someone who nailed the day, as someone who didn't betray themselves. That's the final breakthrough. Not in your system, in yourself. You didn't just become a trader. You became someone who can stay one. And that's what lasts. You made it. That already puts you ahead of most traders because what you've just walked through wasn't entertainment. It was excavation. You've seen the traps, the loops, the hidden parts of you that kept calling it strategy when it was survival. But now you've seen the difference. You've watched the emotional cycles unfold. You've felt the identity weight tied to every click. You've seen how wins became stories, how losses became definitions, how boredom became the real threat. And you've also seen the way out, not through a new setup, not through a perfect system, through stillness, through presence, through a version of you that stops needing the trade to say something about you. That version, it's closer than you think. Because if you've made it here, you're already becoming them. So now the question is, what do you do with that? When you sit down tomorrow and your hands hover over the mouse, will you remember the loops? Will you feel the silence and stay? Will you pause before chasing and ask, what's driving this? That's the difference now. That pause. That's the edge. That's the test. That's the moment where traders either repeat or evolve. So take it. Take the breath. Take the journal. Take the discipline you've earned and protect it like your future depends on it. Because it does. You're not here to look like a legend. You're here to last. And now you know how.